Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the hidden facts about the blacksmiths, forges, and steel of Skyrim. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. The best steel in all of Tamriel. There is a forge above Whiterun where the wind never quite reaches, and the man who tends it has spent more years there than most Nords spend on this earth. Yorland Greymane works the Skyforge, and almost everyone in Skyrim agrees he is the finest blacksmith alive. Adrienne Avenici, who runs her own armory in the city below, says it plainly. Yorland's steel is legendary. Even his rivals admit it through gritted teeth, and even those who resent him still send their apprentices to study the shape of his work from a respectful distance, hoping to steal some small fraction of his technique without ever having to admit they were watching. The strange thing is that Yorland himself barely seems to notice the praise. He has heard it his whole life. To him, it isn't a compliment. It's simply a fact, the way the sky is blue or the snow is cold. And he answers questions about his own skill with the same flat, unbothered certainty he'd use to describe the weather outside his window. Even Yorland's age is something of a mystery, since Kodlak himself once implied the old smith had already served several harbingers before the player ever arrived, which would make him considerably older than his weathered, steady hands let on. A forge older than the city around it. Long before Whiterun existed as a city, the Skyforge was already burning. Local elves once believed it was a relic left behind by the gods themselves, and gave the whole hillside a wide, careful distance, treating the heat and light pouring from the mountainside as something closer to a warning than an invitation. When Ysgramor and his 500 companions arrived, they had no such hesitation. They claimed the forge as their own, built their hall Jorvaska beside it, and the settlement that grew up around that hall eventually became the city we walk through today. In a quiet sense, the entire city of Whiterun exists because of a forge that came first, which means every market stall, every guard patrol, and every Jarl who has ever sat the throne in Dragon's Reach owes some small debt to a fire that was already burning before any of them were born. The surviving songs about the return only confirm that the elves avoided the site and that Ysgramor's people claimed it without hesitation. But the speed of that claim could imply something more deliberate than simple luck, as though Ysgramor's people sensed, even before they understood why, that this particular patch of stone was worth building a civilization around. The shop, named after a little girl's nickname, War Maidens, the armory near Whiterun's main gate, carries a name with a surprisingly tender story behind it. Adrienne Avenici named the shop after her own childhood nickname, one her father gave her because even as a small girl, she was obsessed with swords, dragging wooden practice blades through the dirt long before she ever touched a real one. That same father is Proventus Avenici, steward to the Jarl of Whiterun, which makes Adrienne's path into blacksmithing something of a quiet rebellion against a life of palace politics. Instead of advising Jarls, she chose hammers and anvils and built something entirely her own, a business that bears her old nickname proudly above the door, rather than her father's far more powerful family name. It's worth noting just how unusual that choice really is in a city as status-conscious as Whiterun, where most children of stewards would have leaned hard into the prestige of their family, rather than walking away from it towards soot and sweat. A husband who runs the shop from the inside. Adrienne isn't the only blacksmith at War Maidens. Her husband, Ulfberth Warbear, mirrors her schedule from the opposite side of the same building, while Adrian works the forge outside from morning until evening. Ulfbert tends the interior of the shop, and the two maintain entirely separate stock and separate coin purses, despite sharing a marriage and a roof over their heads. It's a small detail that most players never notice, but it means the smartest way to shop at War Maidens is to trade with Adrian outside first, before ever stepping through the door, since once you cross that threshold and open trade with Ulfbert, Adrian's own merchant gold quietly stops being available to you at all for that visit. Even more interesting, male characters who've invested in the speech perk known as a lure are actually better served bartering with Adrian herself, even once inside the shop, rather than switching over to Ulfbert, a small mechanical wrinkle most players never think to test for themselves. The jeweler who sells her husband's work. Fralia Greymane can usually be found at a modest market stall in Whiterun's Plains district, selling jewellery. What's easy to miss is where that jewellery actually comes from. It's crafted by her husband, Yorland, up at the Skyforge, in whatever spare moments a man so consumed by steel can find for gold and gemstones instead. Fralia herself will tell you that the only subject Yorland ever wants to discuss is the forge itself, though she'll admit, almost fondly, that you might be able to get him talking about the Battleborns if you bring them up the wrong way, since even a man married to his work still keeps a little room in his heart for an old grudge. It paints a quietly domestic picture of a man most players only ever encounter as a stoic figure hammering steel, a husband who apparently still finds time, between forging legendary weapons, to set aside the occasional ring or necklace for his wife to sell. The line that haunts an entire city. If Yorland Greymane dies during a playthrough, something quietly devastating happens to the dialogue around Whiterun. Ask Fralia who the best blacksmith in Skyrim is, and rather than answering, she'll curse you for stirring up sad memories and say that the Skyforge runs cold. Adrian, his closest rival in skill, will say something similar, admitting that Yorland was the best smith in Whiterun, and more, but that he's gone now. It's a small, sorrowful ripple effect that many players trigger by accident and never fully understand until they go looking for the reason why. A whole web of grief written into characters who never explain themselves unless you happen to ask the right question at exactly the wrong time. What makes it land even harder is that the game never flags this for you. There's no quest marker, no journal entry mourning him. The only proof that something has changed is the cold, almost mechanical way two grieving women suddenly answer a question they once would have answered warmly. The Hidden Forge. Beneath the forge. Underneath the Skyforge lies a second, secret space called the Underforge, accessible only to members of the Circle within the Companions. The Skyforge above is closely tied to sunlight, heat, and open sky. The Underforge below is its quiet opposite, linked instead to the moon, and to the werewolves who gather there in secret to embrace their other shape. This sun and moon pairing isn't just atmospheric flavor. It reflects a deliberate duality built into the location. Two forges stacked on top of each other, one public and proud, one hidden and feral, separated by only a few feet of stone and an entire world of secrecy. Most players walk directly over the Underforge dozens of times during their first visit to the Skyforge without ever suspecting it exists, since nothing about the polished, sunlit platform above hints at what's curled in darkness just beneath their boots. Steel you can never forge yourself. Here's something that surprises a lot of smithing-focused players. Skyforge steel, the gear worn by members of the Companions, cannot be crafted at any forge, including the Skyforge itself. It exists only as a finished product Jorlund hands out or sells, restocked from his own merchant chest every couple of days. Mechanically, it deals damage closer to elven weaponry, while weighing and tempering like ordinary steel, which makes it a strange, privileged middle ground between two tiers most players think of as completely separate. The only way to obtain it is to earn Jorlund's trust, not his recipe, and no amount of smithing perks will ever let you replicate it on your own. It's a rare instance of Skyrim deliberately gatekeeping a piece of equipment behind relationship and reputation, rather than raw skill investment, treating Skyforged steel less like a craftable tier and more like a personal gift only Jorlund is allowed to give. A jester's strange fascination. If you ever bring Cicero, the unsettling jester of the Dark Brotherhood, into Whiterun, he has an oddly specific reaction to Skyforged steel. He'll comment on wanting some for himself, savouring the words sharp, sharp, for easy stabbing, in that sing-song voice of his, the same gleeful tone he saves for talking about his beloved cart and his dead mother. It's a tiny Easter egg that rewards players who happen to drag two very different storylines into the same city at the same time. And it says a great deal about Cicero's character in just one line. A man who finds quiet joy in nearly anything sharp. The detail rewards exactly the kind of patient, cross-questline curiosity most players never bother with, since there's no quest marker pointing you toward this one strange little overlap of dialogue. The sword reforged by grief. One of the most quietly moving moments in the companion's questline involves Jorlund reforging the ancient weapon Wuthrad after you recover its final shattered piece. He doesn't use ordinary fire. He uses the flames from Kodlak's own funeral pyre, framing the act almost like a ritual rather than a repair job. The phrase used in the scene, that the flames of a hero can reforge the shattered, turns what could have been a simple fetch quest into something that feels closer to a eulogy carried out in steel, with Jorlund himself stepping back from his usual gruff detachment just long enough to acknowledge what the moment actually means. It's one of the few times in the entire quest line where Jorlund's normally clipped practical dialogue slows down and lingers, as though even he understands that some weapons deserve more ceremony than others. A feud that outlasted a friendship. The Greymanes and the Battleborns are locked in one of Whiterun's oldest rivalries, and Jorlund sits right at the centre of it. Ulfrid Battleborn will openly call Jorlund a stubborn fool, claiming their friendship ended the day Jorlund refused to support the Empire. It's worth noting that Jorlund's loyalty runs so deep that, according to most accounts, he would never forge steel for the Legion, no matter how much coin was offered, even when desperate Imperial officers come begging Adrienne for the work instead, since she has no such allegiance holding her back. In Skyrim, sometimes a blacksmith's politics matter, just as much as his hammerwork. The two families' rivalry runs so deep that it even shapes who becomes Jarl of Whiterun, depending on which side wins the civil war. Meaning a single blacksmith's refusal to compromise echoes all the way up into the city's highest seat of power. The one free lesson every smith offers. Adrienne Avenici, like most blacksmiths scattered across Skyrim, can walk you through a short tutorial on the smithing skill the very first time you speak with her about it. During this lesson, she hands over free materials, so you can craft something and simply keep it afterward, no charge, easing brand new Dragonborns into a skill many of them will lean on for the rest of the game. The detail many players miss is that once this tutorial has been completed with any blacksmith, it becomes permanently unavailable everywhere else. It's a once-in-a-playthrough kindness, easy to stumble into and easy to never think about again, until you notice, dozens of hours later, that no other smith ever offers it. Veteran players who've replayed the game many times over often forget this generosity exists at all, since the moment slips by so quickly during a brand new character's earliest hours. The heart that makes the hardest armor. Daedric equipment sits at the very top of the smithing ladder, but reaching it requires something far stranger than ore. Crafting Daedric gear demands a Daedra heart, typically the single hardest ingredient in the entire process to acquire, since the creatures that carry them are rarely the kind you stumble across casually. The Daedric smithing perk itself also doubles the effectiveness of tempering, which applies not only to Daedric items, but, intriguingly, to Dragon Priest masks and even Ancient Nord armor. Two categories of gear that have nothing to do with Oblivion at first glance, as though the game itself is quietly suggesting some hidden kinship between Nordic antiquity and Daedric power. It's the kind of overlap that rewards players who actually read the perk descriptions carefully, rather than assuming Daedric smithing only ever touches the obviously Daedric corner of their inventory. The forge that isn't really a forge. Tucked beneath the College of Winterhold, in a damp stone passage called the Midden, sits the Atronach forge, and it behaves nothing like a normal smithing station. Instead of ingots and leather strips, it accepts strange offerings, gemstones, salts, and soul gems to conjure creatures, staves, or Daedric gear, transforming raw magical detritus into something far more dangerous than any blacksmith's bench could produce. The recipes themselves are written in Daedric script rather than plain text, which means most players stumble onto its workings only by accident or by looting a dead conjurer's notes, slowly piecing together a recipe book, one corpse at a time. Even players who've spent hundreds of hours with the game sometimes go entire playthroughs without ever pulling the lever once, simply because the Midden's twisting passages discourage casual exploration. Turning ebony into Daedric without a perk. One of the Atronach forge's most useful secrets is its ability to transmute ebony equipment directly into Daedric equipment. No Daedric smithing perk required. The catch is that the ingredients are unusual. Alongside the ebony item and a Daedra heart, the recipe demands a Centurion dynamo core and a black soul gem, and the forge itself must first be upgraded with a sigil stone, an item not exactly easy to come by either. It's a clever workaround for anyone who would rather spend their perks on magic than metalwork, even if assembling the components takes real effort and a fairly deep commitment to the conjuration skill line. Notably, the resulting Daedric item won't carry over any enchantment or tempering that existed on the original ebony piece, which means this shortcut works best on plain, unenchanted gear, rather than something you've already invested heavily in upgrading. A smith with a guild secret. Out on Solstheim, in the town of Raven Rock, the local blacksmith Glover Mallory keeps his forge running for the Redoran Guard. What most travelers never realize is that Glover has a quiet second life. He's the brother of Delvin Mallory back in Riften's Thieves Guild, and there's a shadow mark carved beside his door for anyone who knows what to look for. Ask him about it directly, and he'll begrudgingly admit the connection, grumbling that his brother never even bothers to write, and complaining, half fondly, that Delvin still hasn't found the spine to court Vex properly back at the Ragged Flagon. It's a small thread that connects two entirely separate landmasses in the game, proving that even an island as remote as Solstheim still has its roots tangled up in the politics of a guild hundreds of miles south. The friend who taught him bone mold. Glover Mallory didn't always know how to repair the cracked, ash-toughened bone mold armor common to Morrowind's refugees. He learned the technique from a Dunmer friend named Vanrith Gatherion. swapping smithing knowledge back and forth before Vanrith eventually moved on to other pastures. Glover later packed up his own life in Skyrim and relocated to Raven Rock specifically to put those borrowed lessons to use, which means an entire corner of Solstheim's armor industry exists because of one old friendship, carried across hundreds of miles and built into a stranger's daily livelihood. Interestingly, Vanrith himself can later be encountered as one of the hidden Thieves Guild-linked smiths back in Riften, meaning two old friends ended up scattered across opposite corners of Skyrim's map, each quietly running their own forge without the other ever knowing exactly where they'd landed. The blacksmith who simply vanished. In Skarl village, far to the north of Solstheim, there's a quest that begins with an unsettling premise. The village's blacksmith, Baldur Iron Shaper, has disappeared without explanation, and the village chief Fenari Strongvoice seems strangely unwilling to look into it, while Deor Woodcutter insists something is deeply wrong and refuses to simply let the matter rest. The implication, never stated outright but easy enough to piece together, is that Baldur's specialized knowledge made him a target for outsiders hungry to learn the secrets of a very rare material, and that someone was willing to take him by force to get it. The quest only becomes available after finishing a separate piece of the main Dragonborn storyline, which means many players never even encounter Baldur's empty forge until they've already wandered Skarl village several times, wondering why nobody seems to be smithing there. A pickaxe that unlocks an entire crafting tree. You cannot mine the ice blue material called Stalrim with an ordinary pickaxe. It requires a specific ancient Nordic pickaxe, obtainable either by purchasing it from Baldur Iron Shaper or by completing a small favor for Glover Mallory involving a forgetful old prospector named Cretius, who has misplaced the very tool he once relied on. Many players wander straight past Stalrim deposits for hours, having no idea the glowing blue veins are useless to them without this one specific tool tucked away in a side quest most never think to seek out. Cretius himself is a quietly tragic figure too, an elderly former miner so consumed by his decades-long search for his great-grandfather's remains that most of Raven Rock has written him off as a crazy old man, which makes the favor of returning his pickaxe feel like a small act of kindness towards someone the rest of the town has largely stopped listening to. The forge wife of Dushnik Jarl. Among the orc strongholds of Skyrim, smithing isn't treated as a simple trade. It's treated as an inheritance passed through motherhood. Garol, blacksmith of Dushnik Jarl, explains that an orc is said to first learn to wield a hammer in her mother's womb, and that mothers traditionally teach their children to smith from the moment they're old enough to lift a tool. When a chief takes a second wife specifically for her skill at the forge, that wife earns the honorary title of Forge Wife, a tradition Garol herself carries with quiet, simmering pride, even as she competes for her husband's attention against another favored wife entirely. The detail reframes orc culture in a way the rest of Skyrim rarely bothers to explore, treating the forge not just as a workplace, but as a deeply gendered and deeply respected pillar of how an entire stronghold organizes its family life. Steel shaped by sorrow. Garol's personal story carries one of the more understated emotional beats hidden inside Skyrim's side content. When her daughter Lash chose to leave the stronghold for mining work elsewhere, Garol's grief didn't stay locked inside her. She channeled it directly into a blade, forging a sword meant to carry every ounce of her shame and sadness, and asking any passing traveler to deliver it to Lash as a wordless message. Among orcs, it seems, a blade isn't just a weapon. It's sometimes a letter that never needed to be written down, a way of saying something a mother could never quite manage out loud. the quest never explains exactly how Lash reacts to receiving it, leaving the emotional resolution entirely in the player's imagination. An unusually open-ended choice for a game that often spells its feelings out plainly. The Daedra heart that opens every gate. Gaining entry to Skyrim's orc strongholds as an outsider usually means earning trust through a specific favor, and two of those favors run directly through blacksmiths. Mothgrow Bagel in Markarth's Understone Keep will vouch for you across every stronghold if you bring him a single Daedra heart, while Gorza Grabagel asks instead for the recovery of an old book called The Last Scabbard of a Crash. Two very different smiths, two very different errands, and the same reward waiting at the end of both. A province-wide invitation earned through nothing more than patience and a willingness to run a stranger's errand. Curiously, completing either favor alone is enough to unlock every stronghold at once, which means a player only ever needs to satisfy one blacksmith's request, not both, to walk freely among every orc community in Skyrim. A trick the game itself closed the door on. Long-time players sometimes still talk about the old iron dagger technique, a once famous exploit where crafting hundreds of cheap iron daggers in a row could blast smithing all the way to 100 almost instantly. That loophole existed because, in earlier versions of the game, every crafted item granted the same flat amount of experience regardless of value. A patch closed that door permanently, shifting experience gain to scale with an item's actual worth, which meant quantity stopped mattering and quality finally took its place, forcing an entire generation of players to relearn how leveling smithing actually worked. Forum threads from the years right after that patch are still full of players trading new strategies, almost like an entire community quietly rebuilding its understanding of a skill overnight. Turning lead into gold, quite literally, for players hunting the fastest legitimate route to maxed out smithing. One particular alteration spell quietly changes everything. Transmute mineral ore allows iron ore to become silver, and silver ore to become gold, found inside Halted Stream Camp, north of Whiterun. Combine that spell with buying up every scrap of cheap ore across Skyrim's shops, and a patient player can convert pocket change into a steady stream of gold rings, which happen to be remarkably efficient at pushing the smithing skill upward, turning a quiet alteration tome into one of the most powerful crafting shortcuts in the entire game. Players who pair this spell with an enchanting setup capable of reducing alteration costs to nothing can transmute almost endlessly, turning an entire dungeon's worth of cheap ore into gold, with barely a thought spared to magicka. The smith who refuses to be outdone, Windhelm's blacksmith, Ungul War Anvil, lives in the shadow of a reputation he didn't choose and clearly resents. He'll openly grumble that everyone insists Yorlan Greymane is the best smith in Skyrim, and that he intends to change a few minds about that. Yet, in a rare moment of honesty, Wengul also admits something almost respectful, suggesting that the Skyforge's fire holds a quality no ordinary forge can match, as though Yorlan's advantage isn't entirely about skill at all, but about a privilege of place that no amount of personal talent can fully overcome. If the Empire wins Skyrim's civil war, his bitterness only sharpens further, as a young apprentice named Hermir Strongheart turns to him for training specifically because she refuses to learn from Yorland, giving Ungul a small, hard-won victory he clearly savours. Gossip among Skyrim's elite. During the Thalmor embassy party in the quest Diplomatic Immunity, while Skyrim's upper class mingles over wine and quiet schemes, two guests can be overheard discussing, of all things, blacksmithing rivalries. One remarks that every smith in the province seems determined to prove themselves equal to Yorland Greymane, while the other points out that the comparison isn't fair at all, since nobody else gets to work the Skyforge. It's a strange little detail to plant inside a tense espionage mission, but it speaks to just how far Yorland's reputation has spread, reaching all the way into a room full of nobles who likely couldn't tell a grindstone from a workbench. Most players are so focused on sneaking past guards and stealing documents during that mission that they never slow down long enough to actually listen to this particular exchange. The hammer behind the Scorched Hammer. Riften's most legitimate smithing operation runs out of a shop called the Scorched Hammer, kept alive by Balimund and Asbjorn Firetamer. In a city better known for thieves, shady deals, and a corrupt economy, their forge stands out as one of the few honest trades left standing, a small island of straightforward commerce in a city built on whispered favours. It's a small, quiet contrast worth noticing, that even in Skyrim's most morally murky city, someone is still showing up every day simply to make good, reliable steel, untouched by the politics swirling around them. Balimund in particular carries himself with an almost old-fashioned sense of pride in honest work, a tone that stands out sharply against nearly every other voice you hear echoing through Riften's canals. The smith's Riften keeps out of sight, beyond the open storefront of the Scorched Hammer. Riften hides a second, less reputable layer of blacksmiths entirely. Names like Arnsker Embermaster, Sindus, and Varnrith Gatharian only become available after certain Thieves Guild influence quests are completed, tucked away in the city's darker corners and unreachable to anyone who hasn't proven their worth to Delvin Mallory first. Their existence is a quiet reminder that Riften's economy runs on two separate tracks at once, the visible one any traveller can wander into, and the hidden one that only opens once you've proven you belong there. This means an entirely separate marketplace exists in Riften that most players, even ones who finish the main quest line, will simply never lay eyes on unless they've specifically chased down the Thieves Guild's deeper quest lines. A forge. Where magic refuses to stick, northwest of Whiterun, at Silent Moon's camp, sits the Lunar Forge, a location that sounds mystical and mostly isn't. Functionally, it behaves exactly like any other forge in the game. The only thing that sets it apart are the notes on the Lunar Forge left behind on its workbench, written by someone who apparently spent real time testing whether the forge could enchant items on its own. Their conclusion, recorded right there in the notes, is that it can't confer any enchantment to anything at all, debunking a myth before it ever fully took hold, even as bandits in the camp above continue carrying suspiciously enchanted gear that has nothing to do with the forge itself. It's a quietly funny bit of in-world myth-busting, an unnamed author doing genuine fieldwork just to settle a rumour most players never even heard in the first place. A reward that breaks the usual rules. Once the companion's questline reaches its conclusion and you become Harbinger, Yorland unlocks a special category of crafting at the Skyforge known as Nord Hero Weapons. Unlike almost everything else in the smithing system, these don't use raw materials at all. They require their ancient Nord weapon equivalent, alongside steel ingots and leather strips, essentially asking you to upgrade an existing weapon into a finer version of itself, rather than building one from scratch. It's a small mechanical wrinkle that rewards players who save their ancient Nord loot, instead of selling it off, turning years of accumulated Draga scraps into a meaningful late-game payoff. Notably, several weapon types simply don't exist as Nord hero variants in the base game at all. No dagger, mace, or warhammer without the fishing creation add-on, and no arrows without the unofficial Dawnguard patch. Which means the upgrade path only ever covers a portion of the weapons you might have hoarded along the way. The Blacksmith of Solitude. Beren keeps the forge running at the Solitude Blacksmith, supplying the Imperial capital with a steady stock of arms and armor, while nearby, Fihada works specifically out of the Fletcher, focused entirely on bows and arrows. Between the two of them, soldiers and adventurers passing through Solitude rarely leave without finding exactly the gear they came for, and the city's proximity to the Blue Palace means their wares often end up equipping more than just common travelers. As the seat of Imperial power, Solitude gives Beren's forge an outsized role in the province's politics, supplying gear to soldiers, guards, and officials who carry the Empire's authority well beyond the city's own walls. Windhelm's stubborn forge. Ungol War Anvil holds down Windhelm's smithing trade almost single-handedly, his forge sitting close enough to the market that soldiers loyal to the Stormcloak cause can resupply without much trouble. His bitterness toward Yorlan's reputation, mentioned earlier, never seems to slow down his actual output, suggesting a man who channels resentment productively, one hammer strike at a time, refusing to let an old grudge become an excuse for sloppy work. Windhelm's bitter, freezing climate seems almost to suit him. A forge burning defiantly against a city that rarely lets anyone forget how cold and unforgiving the world outside can be. Markarth's twin orc smiths. Markarth carries an unusual distinction among Skyrim's major cities, hosting 2 orc blacksmiths within its walls rather than just one. Gorza Grabagel works a forge near the water, while Moth Grabagel can be found upstairs inside Understone Keep itself. Both are tied into the quests that unlock access to the orc strongholds scattered across the province, making Markarth something of a gateway city for that entire quest line, and a rare place in Skyrim where orc smithing tradition operates comfortably within a city's stone walls, rather than out on the open frontier. Their presence inside Markarth's ancient Dwemer architecture creates a strange, layered effect, orc tradition humming quietly beneath stonework built by a civilization that vanished long before either smith was ever born. Riften's 2-tiered trade. As already mentioned, Riften's smithing economy splits cleanly into the legitimate Scorched Hammer, run by Balamund and Asbjorn Firetamer, and the hidden network of Thieves' Guild-linked smiths unlocked through influence quests. Few other cities in Skyrim demonstrate so clearly how blacksmithing can mirror the politics and morality of the place it serves, with honest steel and stolen favors somehow sharing the very same streets. Given how thoroughly Maven Blackbriar's influence is known to run through Riften's politics and commerce, it's reasonable to assume both layers of the city's smithing economy answer, in their own way, to her shadow, meaning even the most honest hammerstrike in Riften happens under an influence neither smith likely controls outright. Winterhold's quiet absence. Unlike every other hold capital, Winterhold itself doesn't maintain a dedicated city blacksmith of note, a detail that quietly reflects the city's broader decline following the Great Collapse. Most aspiring smiths in the region have to look toward the nearby college or travel elsewhere entirely, leaving Winterhold's once proud hold without the kind of forge tradition found almost everywhere else in Skyrim. A silence in the city's economy that mirrors the silence left behind by whatever calamity tore half the town into the sea. Older lore suggests Winterhold was once among the grandest cities in all of Skyrim, which makes its current lack of even a single-name blacksmith feel less like an oversight and more like a quiet, deliberate symbol of just how far the city has fallen. a city forged around patronage, not just craft. Solitude's relationship to its blacksmiths runs deeper than simple commerce. Since the city's status as the seat of imperial power in Skyrim means Baron's Forge effectively supplies the very soldiers enforcing the Empire's authority across the province. Every blade Baron tempers and every arrow Fihada fletches becomes, in some small way, an extension of Solitude's political reach, a quiet reminder that even a city's craftsmen can find themselves working in service of something far larger than their own storefront. If the Stormcloaks ever take the city instead, this entire relationship quietly inverts, leaving Baron's Forge supplying a very different army than the one it was originally built to serve, the steward's daughter who chose steel. Returning briefly to Whiterun, it's worth lingering on just how unusual Adrianne's career path really is within the whole capital. As the daughter of a steward with direct access to the Jarl, she could likely have pursued a far more comfortable life inside Dragon's Reach. Instead, she chose smoke, sweat, and an open-air forge, and dialogue even hints she still quietly advises her father behind the scenes, blending two very different worlds without most people realizing it. A woman equally comfortable swinging a hammer and shaping the politics of an entire hold. It's a quiet suggestion that Whiterun's actual governance may owe as much to a blacksmith's instincts as to any formal council ever convened inside the palace above her. A city built around competing reputations. Taken together, Whiterun's smithing scene quietly tells a story all on its own. Yorland commands legendary, almost mythic respect at the Skyforge, while Adrianne and Ulfberth run a grounded working-class operation just down the hill, openly admitting they aren't his equal, but trying anyway. It's a rare case where a city's economy and its emotional undercurrents are shaped by the exact same trade, with every customer who walks through Whiterun's gates quietly choosing, whether they realize it or not, which version of greatness they'd rather support: legend on the hill above, or honest effort in the streets below. Riverwood's steady hand. Down in Riverwood, the blacksmith Alvor maintains a modest but reliable forge that often serves as a new Dragonborn's very first introduction to smithing outside the tutorial cities. His niece, young Dorothy, is even overheard dreaming aloud about one day becoming as skilled as Yorland Greymane, a small detail that shows just how far the legendary smith's reputation travels, even into villages that barely register on most players' mental map, carried in the daydreams of a girl who may never even see the Skyforge with her own eyes. Alvor's quiet domestic life, raising his daughter Dorothy alongside his wife Sigrid, while still keeping his forge running every day, gives Riverwood's smithing scene a warmth that the grander city forges rarely bother to match. A family tied to the Dragon's Reach. Alvor's connection to the wider Whiterun hold runs deeper than simple proximity. As one of the first named characters most players ever meet, his forge in Riverwood often becomes the quiet backbone of an early playthrough, supplying gear long before anyone's ready to brave the city's politics or the Skyforge's intimidating reputation. A humble starting point that countless Dragonborns never fully appreciate until they look back on how far they've come. His own nephew, Hadvar, often ends up fighting on behalf of the Empire, which means Alvor's modest little forge sits at the quiet, personal intersection of a family with a foot on each side of the same civil war, playing out across the entire province. The bug that made a smith disappear, Heimvar, a blacksmith mentioned in Solitude's broader roster of NPCs, was originally intended to step into Beiran's role if anything ever happened to him. A long-standing technical issue meant this replacement never actually triggered in the base game. leaving Baron permanently irreplaceable unless outside fixes were applied. It's a strange little crack in the world's design, a backup plan quietly written into the game's bones that simply never got to do its job, leaving an entire contingency plan sitting dormant and unused for over a decade. It's a small, almost poignant thought, an entire character written and named specifically to step in during tragedy, waiting patiently in the game's code for a moment that, for most players, will simply never come. A smith whose trade doesn't quite work. At Largashbur, the orc stronghold plagued by giants, a character named Garruk is technically classified as a blacksmith, yet doesn't function as a working merchant due to an old scripting issue. It's a small reminder that even Skyrim's most populated world is full of background characters who were clearly meant to do more than they ultimately got to do, frozen mid-purpose by a bug nobody ever circled back to fix, standing at her forge forever without ever once being able to sell what she makes. The companion apothecary character Artub, at the very same stronghold, suffers from an identical issue, suggesting Largashbur as a whole was simply rushed past during the final stretch of the game's development. Two smiths, one broken handoff. The Heimbar situation and the Garruk situation both point toward the same underlying truth about Skyrim's world. Beneath the visible economy of named blacksmiths selling wares at their stalls, there's a quieter layer of half-finished design, characters who were written with a role in mind that the final game never quite let them play, their potential frozen somewhere between intention and execution. It's the kind of detail that only really surfaces once a player has spent enough hours in the game to start noticing the seams, the places where Skyrim's enormous, sprawling world quietly ran out of time before it ran out of ambition. A hold, defined by contrast. Whiterun. Hold ultimately tells two smithing stories at once, the grand mythic one centered on the Skyforge, and the small human ones scattered through villages like Riverwood, where blacksmiths like Alva simply keep their communities running without any legend attached to their name at all, content to matter quietly rather than loudly. Between the two extremes sits Adrian and Ulfbert's War Maidens, a kind of middle ground proving that even within a single hold, the trade of smithing can mean wildly different things depending on which street or which hillside you happen to be standing on. Dawnstar's Forge by the Sea. Up in the frostbitten port town of Dawnstar, Rustleaf tends the local forge from inside his own house, with Seren working alongside him. Their shop carries a quieter, more practical energy than the grand city forges further south, fitting for a town better known for its troubled sleep and shipping trade than for legendary steel. A place where the forge feels almost like an afterthought beside the sea, and the strange nightmares said to drift through it. Few players linger long in Dawnstar, which means Rustleaf's modest forge ends up quietly underused compared to almost any other named blacksmith in the game, despite offering perfectly reliable service to anyone who actually stops to ask. Falkreath's Forest Forge. In the deep pine-shadowed hold of Falkreath, the blacksmith Lod keeps watch over a community more concerned with logging and graveyards than glory. His forge rarely draws much attention from passing adventurers, yet it remains one of the steady, unglamorous threads holding Falkreath's modest economy together, supplying axes for timber and blades for travelers without ever asking for recognition in return. Falkreath's entire economy, built around its famous graveyard and its lumber trade, depends on exactly the kind of dependable, unflashy craftsmanship Lod offers every single day at his anvil. The Imperial and Stormcloak camp anvils. Scattered across nearly every hold are temporary military encampments belonging to either the Imperial Legion or the Stormcloak Rebellion, and every single one includes an anvil staffed by a quartermaster. These aren't named story-driven blacksmiths in the traditional sense, but they quietly prove that Skyrim's civil war runs on steel just as much as it runs on ideology, with every camp depending on someone willing to keep hammering long after the speeches and banners have done their part. These quartermasters rarely get so much as a line of unique dialogue, yet without them, neither side of the war could plausibly keep its soldiers armed for more than a single battle. Shaw's Stone's tiny mining economy. Near Riften sits the small settlement of Shaw's Stone, built almost entirely around its iron mine. While not home to a dedicated named blacksmith of major renown, the Orc resident Grogmar Gro Burzag connects the settlement's mining work directly to the wider network of Orc stronghold access, proving that even Skyrim's smallest towns can hold a key to unlocking content elsewhere on the map, hidden inside what looks, at first glance, like nothing more than a sleepy mining outpost. It's a settlement so small that many players race straight through it without ever realizing a single completed favor that could open doors all the way across the province. Karthwasten's troubled mine. Near Markarth, the tiny settlement of Karthwasten survives on the output of a single silver mine, with the miner Lashgra Dushnig, daughter of Garol, working there after leaving her stronghold behind. Her presence quietly threads two of Skyrim's smithing storylines together: the Orc tradition she grew up inside and the rough mining economy she eventually chose for herself. A daughter's quiet act of independence playing out far from her mother's forge. The settlement's mercenary troubles, which the Dragonborn is often asked to resolve, mean Lash's quiet new life is rarely as peaceful as she might have hoped when she first left Dushnik Jarl behind. The Skarl village, without its smith. As covered earlier, Skarl village's defining smithing story is really an absence: the missing boulder Iron Shaper, and the secrecy surrounding Stalrim that his disappearance puts back into focus. Few small settlements in Skyrim manage to make so much narrative weight out of one empty forge, its cold anvil sitting untouched as a quiet symbol of everything the village has lost. The contrast between Baldor's eventual return and the cold, anxious weeks the village spends without him gives Skarl Village one of the more emotionally complete smithing arcs found anywhere outside the mainland. A patchwork province held together by hammers. What ties all of these smaller settlements together isn't fame or legendary steel. It's consistency. Whether it's Rustleaf in Dawnstar, Lod in Falkreath, or a nameless quartermaster at a war camp, Skyrim's outlying villages all share the same quiet assumption: that no community, however small, survives long without somebody willing to keep a forge lit through the long, cold nights. It's a thread that runs underneath nearly every settlement in the game, easy to overlook precisely because it works so reliably that most players never have a reason to think about it at all. Raven Rock's Refugee Forge. Returning briefly to Solstheim, Glover Mallory's smithy in Raven Rock deserves one more mention here, since the settlement itself exists as a kind of refugee outpost for Dunmer fleeing the Red Year. His steady supply of repaired and crafted gear for the Redoran Guard isn't just a gameplay convenience. It's a quiet act of community survival dressed up as a shopkeeper's daily routine. The steady clang of his hammer becoming one small proof that the town intends to keep standing, no matter how much ash continues to drift down from the Red Mountain in the distance. The four strongholds and their smiths. Skyrim's four orc strongholds, Dushnik Jarl, Lagashbur, Morkazgur, and Nazulbur, each maintain their own permanent forge, and most maintain their own dedicated blacksmith as well. Outsiders are barred from these forges entirely until they earn the status of bloodkin, a status that almost always runs through a specific favor tied to one of the stronghold's own residents, a system of trust that treats access to the anvil as something that has to be earned, never simply assumed. Even after earning bloodkin status, the warmth extended to outsiders rarely extends much further than business, a reminder that the strongholds value usefulness and respect far more than friendliness for its own sake. Gorza Gra Bagel, the expert trainer. Beyond her blacksmith duties in Markarth, Gorza Gra Bagel also appears connected to Nazulbor's forge tradition as one of the more advanced smithing trainers available to bloodkin travelers, capable of training the skill up to a notably high threshold. For players focused on maxing out their smithing the legitimate way, earning her trust is a genuinely efficient detour, one that pays off far beyond the simple cost of the gold spent on lessons. Her presence in 2 different locations in some accounts of the lore has led to occasional confusion among players trying to track exactly which Gra Bagel does what, a small naming overlap that has sparked more than a few mixed-up wiki edits over the years. Moth Grow Bagel's quiet influence. Moth Grow Bagel, stationed in Understone Keep, plays a similar role for Dushnik Jarl, training smithing up to an advanced level once you've proven yourself worthy of stronghold access. It's easy to walk past him as just another merchant, but his presence quietly bridges Markarth's city economy with the isolated orc settlements just beyond its walls, a single orc standing at the crossroads of 2 very different worlds. His willingness to vouch for an outsider after the simple gift of a Daedra heart suggests a man more pragmatic than ceremonial, valuing usefulness over the more elaborate quests other strongholds sometimes demand. Worship woven into the workbench, orc strongholds revolve around devotion to Malakath, the Daedric prince associated with curses, outcasts, and broken oaths, and that devotion bleeds directly into their smithing culture. Crafting high-quality arms and armor isn't treated as mere commerce among orcs. It's treated as a mark of personal honor, almost a form of worship carried out with hammer and tongs instead of prayer. Every finished blade standing as a small offering to a prince who values strength above almost everything else. It's a detail that recontextualizes every transaction at an orc forge, turning a simple weapon purchase into something closer to participating, however briefly, in someone else's quiet act of devotion. Largashbur's Cursed Forge. Largashbur stands apart from the other 3 strongholds as a community under constant siege from nearby giants. Its forge kept lit despite an atmosphere of near constant crisis. The blacksmith situation there, including the non-functional Garruk mentioned earlier, only adds to the sense that Largashbur is a stronghold perpetually fighting just to survive, let alone thrive, its anvil ringing out beneath a sky that always seems one bad afternoon away from disaster. The stronghold's main questline, which involves confronting the source of its curse directly, makes Largashbur one of the more dramatically weighted orc settlements in the entire game. Its forge a small, stubborn act of normalcy in the middle of an ongoing siege. Morkazgur's Isolated Hammer. Tucked into the far northwest corner of Skyrim, Morkazgur maintains its forge with comparatively little outside attention, overshadowed by the more questline-relevant strongholds elsewhere. Its relative obscurity doesn't make its forge any less essential to daily orc life there, just less visible to traveling adventurers who rarely have a reason to detour that far north, leaving its hammer striking steel for an audience of almost no one but its own people. Borgak the Steel Heart, a potential follower and spouse found there, gives Morkazgur one of its few real hooks for outside attention, even as its forge continues operating in near total anonymity. Orichalcum and the colour of Orc steel. Orcish weapons and armour draw heavily on orichalcum ore, frequently mined directly from veins inside or near the strongholds themselves, like the Dushnik mine connected to Dushnik Yal. This material gives Orcish gear its distinctive look and ties the stronghold's military identity directly to the literal ground beneath their feet. An economy of self-sufficiency baked into the landscape itself, where the very stone the orcs live on top of becomes the steel they carry into battle. It's a closed loop of resource and identity rarely matched anywhere else in Skyrim. A culture quite literally built from the rock it calls home. The smith murdered by his rival. According to in-game lore texts on smithing, a figure named Haemon Forgefire is remembered as the greatest smith Skyrim ever produced, the one who crafted the legendary weapon known as Oakin. His story doesn't end peacefully. Haemon was murdered by a rival smith, a detail that turns his legacy into something closer to tragedy than triumph, a reminder that even the most celebrated craftsman in an entire province's history could still fall to simple, human jealousy. His name remembered as much for the manner of his death as for the brilliance of his work. The historical texts that preserve his story never quite name the rival responsible, leaving Haemon's murder as one of those small, permanent mysteries the lore seems content to let sit unanswered. The Forger of Volendrung. Among Tamriel's most fearsome Daedric artifacts is Volendrung, the warhammer belonging to Malakath, Prince of the Orcs. While the specific smith credited with its creation sits buried deep in older Elder Scrolls lore rather than Skyrim's own texts, the weapon itself appears throughout Orcish culture as a symbol of strength, and many strongholds quietly model their own forging traditions on the idea that a truly worthy blacksmith might one day craft something worthy of standing beside it, a standard so high that no living orc smith in Skyrim openly claims to have reached it. Based on what we know of Volendrung's history, the weapon has passed through numerous mortal hands across the centuries, only to eventually slip away from each owner in turn, which could suggest that true lasting ownership of it was never really meant to last, the hammer always finding its way back toward Malakath's domain. The crafter of Umbra's curse. Nenro Ware is remembered in broader Elder Scrolls lore as the smith who forged Umbra, a cursed Daedric blade created for the prince Clavicus Vile. Umbra's reputation as a soul-trapping weapon, one whose wielder risks being consumed by the blade itself over time, gives Nenra's legacy a darker shade than most smiths in the historical record. Crafting something powerful, this story implies, doesn't always mean crafting something safe, and Nenra's name survives in the histories less as a hero of the trade than as a cautionary tale about whose commissions a smith ought to accept. It's a quiet warning embedded directly into the lore of smithing itself, that skill without discernment can just as easily produce a curse as a masterpiece. Mithras, greatest of the Dwemer smiths. Among the vanished Dwemer, a figure named Mithras is remembered as the greatest of their blacksmiths, a title that carries extra weight given how thoroughly the Dwemer themselves disappeared from Tamriel. Every piece of dwarven metal a player mines or melts down in Skyrim's ruins exists, in some distant lineage, downstream of craftsmen like Mithras, even though the civilization that trained them is long gone, leaving behind machinery and ingots as the only surviving proof that their methods ever existed at all. There's something quietly haunting about wandering Dwemer ruins with this fact in mind, every centurion and spider construct a kind of distant, unintentional monument to a master smith whose name almost nobody in Skyrim still remembers. Kagrenak, the smith who tried to reshape a god. Few names in Elder Scrolls lore carry as much ambition as Kagrenak, the Dwemer mage smith and tonal architect responsible for the original brass god, Anumidium. While his story belongs more to the deep cosmic lore of the series than to anything you'll find directly inside Skyrim, his presence looms over every Dwemer ruin you crawl through, a reminder that some blacksmiths in this world weren't simply making weapons. They were trying to engineer the architecture of reality itself, treating metal and tone and divinity as though they were all variations on the very same material. It's worth noting that Kagrenak's tools, scattered and lost long ago, are still occasionally referenced in lore as objects of immense and dangerous potential, the kind of legacy that makes an ordinary blacksmith's hammer look almost humble by comparison. Nulion and the secret of elven steel. Nulion, a master smith of Somerset Isle, is remembered in lore as one of the great keepers of elven armor crafting technique, a confidant trusted with secrets that shaped how an entire culture armed itself for generations. It's worth pausing on the idea that, somewhere in Skyrim's history of war and trade, the elven gear found on bandits and soldiers alike traces its lineage back to a tradition first refined by smiths like him, far across the sea, long before any of it ever touched Skyrim's snow. Every elven dagger looted from a common bandit camp, in other words, carries a quiet inheritance from a tradition of craftsmanship that began on an island most Nords will never set foot on in their lives. The Forge of the Hollow City, deep within the plain of Cold Harbour, ruled by the Daedric prince Molag Bal, lies a place called Black Forge, where the troops of his realm have their weapons made on a scale closer to an industrial operation than a craftsman's workshop. According to lore, mortal blacksmiths have, on occasion, even been found working within the nearby Hollow City under Meridia's protection, a strange and unsettling reminder that smithing as a trade exists even in realms far beyond mortal Skyrim, practiced by hands that never expected to end up forging weapons in someone else's hell. The contrast between Black Forge's industrial cruelty and the small, almost tender mortal pocket of craftsmanship nearby paints two very different pictures of what smithing can mean, even within the same hostile plane of existence. Astri Bedel, master of two traditions. Astri Bedel, a Breton smith remembered in wider lore, is credited as a master of both mannish and merish smithing techniques, eventually using that combined knowledge to forge the artifact Chrysamere. Her story stands out because it suggests that the very best smithing, even by legendary standards, often comes from blending traditions rather than mastering just one, a lesson that quietly echoes through Skyrim's own mixed cultural landscape of Nord, Orc, Dunmer, and Imperial techniques, all sharing the same anvils, sometimes within sight of one another in the very same city. Chrysamere's enduring reputation as one of Tamriel's most coveted artifacts only adds weight to the idea that Astri's cross-cultural approach produced something far greater than either tradition could have managed entirely on its own. The Sigil Stone's fragile perch. Once a sigil stone is placed onto the Atronach Forge's altar to unlock its more powerful recipes, it sits balanced rather precariously. Certain shouts and explosive spells can actually knock the stone clean off its holder, sending it rolling uselessly across the floor until you interact with the altar again to retrieve it. It's a small, easily overlooked physics quirk that has frustrated more than one careless mage mid-ritual. watching their carefully obtained sigil stone go skittering away across damp stone at the worst possible moment. Even once it's retrieved and placed back, the stone will simply roll off again from the exact same spot if it's ever disturbed twice, a stubborn little quirk the game never quite bothered to patch away. A recipe. Written in a language most players never learn. The earliest recipes available at the Atronach Forge are written using the in-game Daedric alphabet, a stylized script the game never requires you to actually translate yourself. Most players never realize they're looking at a constructed language at all, simply matching ingredient icons to results through trial and error, while a smaller, more curious subset actually take the time to learn the alphabet and read the runes directly, treating the forge less like a slot machine and more like a genuine puzzle worth solving on its own terms. It's a quiet bit of world building hidden in plain sight, a fully realized written language most players brush past entirely on their way to the next conjured prize. The trick for cleaning stolen goods. One of the more practical secrets of the Atronach Forge is its usefulness for laundering stolen property. Pickpocketed gems, soul gems, and salt piles can all be fed into its various recipes, and once transformed into a new crafted item, the stolen tag attached to the original materials disappears entirely. It turns a strange magical conjuring apparatus into, almost by accident, one of the more elegant theft cleaning tools in the entire game, hidden in plain sight beneath a college full of mages who would likely disapprove if they ever found out. It's the kind of secret that feels almost mischievous once you realize it. A loophole the developers likely never intended to double as a thief's quiet little laundromat. Dremora. You cannot banish. If you use the Atronach Forge's more advanced recipes to summon a hostile Dremora, you'll find it behaves differently than the Dremora you'd normally conjure through conjuration magic. No banishing effect of any kind works on it, not even exploits that would normally overpower a banish enchanted weapon. Once it's standing in front of you, the only real solution is the same one Skyrim usually offers. You simply have to fight it, steel against steel, with no magical shortcut left to lean on. It's a small but pointed design choice, a reminder that whatever the Forge conjures answers to rules slightly different from the rest of the game's usual magic. A free source of enchanted iron and fire damage, players willing to farm the Atronach Forge's Dremora summoning recipe can turn a single Daedra heart into a surprisingly steady source of income. Every conjured Dremora drops a weapon enchanted with fire damage, along with its own Daedra heart, which means one heart used correctly can effectively multiply itself, alongside an excess of raw iron daggers. Nobody particularly needs but can always sell, turning a single dangerous offering into an almost self-sustaining little business. Patient players who keep a steady supply of raw meat and skulls on hand can effectively run this loop for hours, turning the midden into something closer to a strange, smoky little factory floor. The boots that aren't quite right. A long-standing oddity of the Atronach Forge involves its Daedric boots recipe. Rather than producing standard Daedric boots, it actually creates a separate Dremora-specific variant of the item, one that won't visibly show up sitting in your inventory the way normal boots would, despite still adding their weight to your carry capacity. It's the kind of bug that quietly confuses players for years before they finally look it up, convinced their character has simply grown heavier for no reason at all. The discrepancy has been documented and explained in community patches for years, yet it persists untouched in the base, unpatched version of the game to this day. A path to Daedric gear without a single spent perk, perhaps the most valuable overall takeaway about the Atronach Forge is how it sidesteps the traditional smithing perk tree entirely. A player who never invests a single point into Daedric smithing can still walk away wearing a full set of Daedric armor, provided they're willing to gather the stranger ingredients and complete the conjuration questline tied to the sigil stone. It rewards mages just as generously as it rewards warriors, an unusually even-handed piece of design that quietly erases the line between a battle mage's spellbook and a blacksmith's anvil. It's worth remembering, though, that gear made this way will never benefit from the double tempering bonus the actual perk provides, a small permanent trade-off baked into taking the shortcut. Dragonbone, the spoils of a war with the sky. Introduced through the Dawnguard expansion, Dragonbone weapons require harvesting the bones and scales of dragons you've personally slain, turning every battle against one of Skyrim's most dangerous creatures into a direct material investment in your future gear. The Dragon Armor perk specifically improves these weapons and armor, doubling their improvement at a grindstone or workbench, which means dragon slaying and blacksmithing, two of the game's most iconic pillars, are mechanically tied directly together. Each dragon you fell quietly fattening your future arsenal. It's a system that turns the province's most cinematic encounters into something closer to a supply chain. Every roar in the sky, a future hilt or helmet waiting to be claimed. Stalhrim's cold, quiet advantage. Stalhrim equipment, found exclusively through Solstime's content, carries a subtle bonus that many players overlook entirely. Any frost-based enchantment applied to a Stalhrim item becomes 25% stronger than it would be on ordinary gear, a built-in affinity that makes sense given the material's icy, ethereal appearance. For a frost mage or a cold-resistant build, that bonus alone can make Stalhrim worth the considerable effort required to mine and craft it, turning what looks like a simple cosmetic choice into a genuinely strategic one. It's a rare case of a material's law and its mechanics lining up almost perfectly. Ice that genuinely behaves like ice should. The quest that tests your character, not your combat. Once you've recovered Baldur and he points you toward Ankarian's ship at North Shore Landing, the encounter offers several distinct resolutions. You can fight outright, persuade or intimidate him with a high enough speech skill to abandon his mission entirely, or strike a deal where you agree to supply him with Stalhrim weapons in exchange for the map. It's a rare branch in Skyrim's questing, where diplomatic options and a willingness to trade directly affect how a confrontation plays out, and the deal route even unlocks Ankarian as a merchant afterward. Two blades buried with a pirate king. Solstime's most unusual pair of scimitars, Bloodscythe and Soulrender, have nothing to do with a forge at all. They belong to Haknir Deathbrand, a legendary and deeply violent Nord pirate captain who cursed the blades before his death and had them sealed inside Gildenhall Barrow along with his remains. Retrieving them requires completing the Deathbrand treasure quest and defeating Haknir's ghost in a final chamber, whose entrance is sealed with Stalhrim, which means even these loot-found weapons end up tied, in a small way, to the same rare ice material that defines so much of the island's character. When dual-wielded together, their enchantments activate in tandem, giving them a combined effect no other pair of weapons in Skyrim can replicate. The improved bone mold. That almost didn't happen. Glover Mallory's personal questline, paid in full, exists specifically to recover a bone mold formula from inside the dangerous castle Karstag Caverns, eventually unlocking improved bone mold armor at his forge. Without completing that quest, the upgraded version of one of Solstime's most distinctly Dunmer armor styles simply remains out of reach, a small reminder that even practical working-class gear in Skyrim sometimes hides behind real adventuring risk. guarded by something far colder and meaner than a simple locked door. The caverns themselves, infamous for their connection to an old frost-touched warlord of legend, give this otherwise modest armor upgrade a surprisingly grim backstory for something so unassuming on the surface. The Deathbrand set, hidden beyond the mainland. While not crafted at a forge in the traditional sense, the Deathbrand armor set on Solstheim connects loosely to the same culture of rare water and ice adapted equipment that defines the island's smithing identity. Recovering it requires locating a remote, bandit-guarded shoal and picking an expert-level lock, a detour that rewards players willing to wander away from Solstheim's main questline entirely, chasing rumor and a half-remembered book, rather than any clearly marked quest path. The set's enchantments, tailored heavily towards sneaking and underwater combat, suggest whoever wore it originally lived a life defined by the same cold, restless coastline the armor was eventually buried beneath. A crafting tree shaped by an island's isolation. Taken as a whole, Solstheim's smithing options, Stalrim, improved bone mold, and the lingering presence of dragonbone from Dawnguard all share a common thread. They exist specifically because the island sits apart from the rest of Skyrim, populated by refugees, ash, and old Dunmer customs that never fully blended into the mainland's Nordic traditions, and its forges quietly reflect that separation, producing gear that simply wouldn't make sense growing out of any mainland city's tradition. Even the climate itself, half volcanic ash and half Arctic chill, seems to have shaped what kind of steel an island like this was ever going to produce. The heart that only Daedra carry. Daedra hearts remain one of the most consistently difficult ingredients in the entire smithing system, typically requiring either purchase from specialized alchemy merchants at a steep price or recovery from defeated Daedra themselves. Their scarcity is precisely what makes Daedric gear feel earned, rather than simply crafted, a deliberate bottleneck built into the game's economy to keep its strongest armor meaningfully rare, no matter how deep a player's pockets happen to run. Some players resort to a small, semi-reliable trick, repeatedly checking merchant stock every few days, simply hoping one finally turns up for sale, rather than hunting Daedra down by hand. Ebony's long road to the surface. Ebony ore, the foundation of both ebony and, by extension, Daedric gear, only appears in specific mining veins scattered through Skyrim, often guarded by bandits or hidden deep in dangerous caves. Its relative scarcity compared to iron or steel ore is a deliberate piece of pacing, designed to ensure that by the time you can actually afford to craft ebony gear, you've usually fought your way through plenty of danger to get there. Every dark vein a small monument to the fights it took just to reach it. Certain mines, like the one tucked into Orc stronghold territory, also tie ebony's availability directly back into the same favor-based trust system that governs access to the strongholds themselves. Orichalcum and the identity of the Orcs. As mentioned earlier alongside the Orc strongholds, Orichalcum ore carries cultural weight beyond its simple stat block. It's the backbone of Orcish weaponry and armor, mined directly from veins tied to specific strongholds, which means the material itself is almost inseparable from Orc identity in Skyrim, an ore that doubles as a kind of cultural signature, recognizable on sight long before you ever notice the maker's mark. Its faintly golden, almost coppery sheen makes Orcish gear visually distinct from nearly everything else on the smithing tree. A small but deliberate design choice, tying appearance directly to heritage. Quicksilver's quiet importance. Quicksilver ore plays a supporting but essential role in Stalrim crafting, required alongside the Stalrim itself and steel ingots and leather strips to actually produce finished gear. It's easy to overlook Quicksilver entirely while focused on hunting down the flashier blue material, but without it, every Stalrim recipe simply falls apart at the workbench. A humble, easily ignored ingredient, quietly holding the entire process together. Fortunately, Quicksilver veins are considerably easier to find across Solstheim than Stalrim itself, which means the real bottleneck in crafting always comes back to the rarer material rather than this quieter supporting one. Centurion cores and the strange cost of Daedric shortcuts. The Atronach Forge's ebony to Daedric transmutation recipe requires a Centurion dynamo core, an item normally associated with the massive Dwemer automatons found deep in their ruins, not with Daedric crafting at all. It's a strange, almost poetic ingredient mismatch, asking players to harvest a piece of an ancient lost civilization's war machine just to circumvent a perk tied to the literal Princes of Oblivion. Two extinct and otherworldly forces colliding inside a single recipe. Tracking one down usually means surviving a fight with an actual dwarven centurion first, which means this particular shortcut still demands a fair amount of danger before it ever pays off. The Black Soul Gem's darker requirement. That same transmutation recipe also calls for a Black Soul Gem, an item explicitly capable of capturing human souls, rather than only the souls of creatures. Its inclusion quietly implies a much darker undertone to the shortcut, suggesting the magic powering this particular Daedric workaround draws, in some small way, on something considerably more troubling than ordinary enchanting ever requires you to confront directly. A detail most players skim past without ever pausing to consider what it actually means. It's a quiet, almost easily missed moment where the game lets a crafting recipe carry real moral weight if you happen to stop and read between the lines. The stones that never run out until they do. Mining veins for materials like iron, silver, gold, and orichalcum will eventually respawn over time if you wait long enough, typically around 30 in-game days, which means even Skyrim's rarest feeling resources are, with enough patience, technically renewable. Many players never realize this and assume a depleted vein is gone for good, abandoning perfectly good mining spots that would have refilled if they'd simply returned a season later, walking away from fortunes they didn't know were quietly regenerating behind them. It's a quiet, almost generous piece of game design that rewards the kind of player willing to build a slow, returning relationship with the landscape, rather than stripping it bare once and moving on forever. Value over volume. Since the patch that removed the old flat experience system, smithing experience now scales directly with the value of whatever you're crafting or improving. This single change reshaped the entire meter around leveling the skill, turning expensive jewelry and high-tier weapons into far more efficient training tools than the cheap iron and leather gear new players instinctively reach for first, rewarding patience and planning over sheer repetition. It's a system that quietly punishes the instinct to grind cheaply, nudging players instead toward thinking about smithing, almost like an investment portfolio, rather than a simple checklist of crafted items. The grindstone's hidden math. Improving a weapon at a grindstone grants smithing experience scaled to the strength of the improvement itself, not simply the act of improving something. A heavily tempered weapon, pushed from poor condition to legendary quality in one sitting, grants noticeably more experience than the same weapon improved repeatedly in tiny increments. A detail that rewards patience and planning over repetitive grinding, turning one careful sitting into something far more valuable than a dozen rushed ones. Few players ever stop to test this math directly, simply assuming more clicks must always equal more progress. when the truth is considerably more nuanced. Potions that multiply. Your progress. Blacksmith's potions and elixirs, whether brewed through alchemy or found as loot, grant a significant temporary bonus to weapon and armor improvement for a short window of time. Players who stack these potions before a major tempering session can dramatically inflate both the quality of their gear and the smithing experience gained from making it, turning a routine errand into a genuinely efficient leveling strategy. One quiet vial transforming an ordinary evening at the forge into something far more productive. Combining several such potions at once, when ingredients allow, can push a single tempering session into genuinely staggering territory, far beyond what the same action would normally accomplish. The books that quietly raise your skill. Scattered throughout Skyrim's dungeons and shops are 4 specific skill books tied to smithing: Cherim's Heart, Heavy Armor Forging, Light Armor Forging, and the Armorer's Challenge, each granting a permanent 1-point increase to the skill simply by reading them. They're easy to miss among Skyrim's huge volume of in-game literature, yet collecting all 4 offers a small, permanent head start that costs nothing but a few minutes of looting. A quiet reward for anyone who actually stops to read the books most adventurers walk straight past. Several of these texts can be found tucked inside forges and smithing adjacent locations themselves, almost as if the game is gently rewarding players who pay attention to the very rooms they're already standing in. The Ogma Infinium's one-time gift. For players who manage to acquire the unique book Ogma Infinium, choosing the Path of Might grants an immediate 5-point boost to several combat-related skills, smithing included. It's a one-time reward, consumed the moment it's used, which makes the choice between paths a small but meaningful decision point for anyone optimizing a particular build, a single page capable of reshaping an entire character's trajectory in one quiet, irreversible choice. The book itself can only ever be used once per playthrough, which means the decision of which path to choose tends to linger in a player's memory long after the rest of the quest that delivered it has faded. Workbenches, grindstones, and the forge itself. Many newer players assume a single station handles all of smithing's functions, when in reality, the system is split deliberately across several tools. The forge or anvil creates new gear from raw materials, the grindstone sharpens weapons for extra damage, and the workbench improves armor and shields, while related but technically separate skills like tanning racks produce the leather those other stations eventually consume. An entire quiet assembly line most players walk past without ever noticing how it all connects. Recognizing this layout makes it far easier to understand why some forges, like the Skyforge itself, can feel strangely incomplete, missing entire stations that simply weren't built into their original design. Hearthfire's quiet expansion of the trade. With the Hearthfire add-on installed, the smithing skill expands beyond weapons and armor entirely, allowing the creation of certain house-building materials directly at a forge. It's a subtle shift that turns blacksmithing from a purely combat-adjacent skill into something closer to a foundation for an entirely separate homesteading playstyle. The same anvil that once tempered a sword, now just as comfortable shaping the bones of someone's future home. It's a quiet reminder that beneath all the dragons and Daedra, Skyrim's smithing system was always built with an eye towards something as ordinary and grounding as simply building a life. A trainer in every corner of the map. Beyond Gorza and Moth, grow Bagel in the Orc strongholds. Nearly every named blacksmith across Skyrim doubles as a smithing trainer in their own right, willing to teach a few points of the skill for a fee that scales with how far you're trying to push it. It's a quietly generous design choice, ensuring that wherever a Dragonborn happens to wander, gold in hand, there's almost always someone nearby willing to share a little more of the craft. The sheer density of available trainers means a patient, well-funded player could realistically level smithing to its cap through paid lessons alone, never once lighting a forge themselves. The first lesson every Dragonborn receives. As mentioned earlier, nearly every blacksmith in Skyrim can walk a new player through a short tutorial quest the very first time smithing comes up in conversation, granting free materials and a finished item to keep, because this tutorial vanishes permanently after the first completion. Many players don't even realize how close they came to missing it, having stumbled into the dialogue with whichever blacksmith happened to be standing nearby that particular afternoon. It's the kind of generosity baked so deeply into the game's earliest hours that most players simply absorb it, without ever realizing how deliberately it was designed. Glory of the Dead and a forge that wakes up. Completing the companion's questline and curing Kodlak's restless spirit doesn't just hand you the title of Harbinger. It changes the Skyforge itself, unlocking Nord hero weapons and ancient Nord armor at the forge, and prompting Yorlan to remark, almost wonderingly, that the forge has felt different, more awake, ever since Kodlak's funeral. It's a rare case where a quest's emotional resolution and its mechanical reward arrive wrapped in the exact same line of dialogue, grief and gameplay, fused into one quiet observation that most players read past too quickly to notice how strange and lovely it really is. A new source of Stalrim. Skal Village's missing smith resolved. The quest that finally resolves Baldur Ironshaper's disappearance sends you chasing down a Thalmor agent and a hidden map, ultimately returning Baldur to Skal Village so he can finally teach you the long-guarded secret of working Stalrim. It transforms an early, unsettling mystery into a genuinely rewarding crafting unlock, closing the loop on a thread that begins the moment you first hear Deor's worried complaints echoing through the village. Baldur's quiet relief upon returning home gives the whole questline a small, satisfying emotional landing that purely mechanical crafting unlocks rarely bother to include. Paid in full and the cost of an old friendship. Glover Mallory's personal questline asks you to track down a stolen bone mold formula inside a dangerous frozen cavern, all so he can finally offer improved bone mold armor at his forge in Raven Rock. Threaded quietly through the quest is the larger reveal of his Thieves Guild connections, meaning a simple armor upgrade ends up tangled in family secrets he'd clearly rather have kept buried. A quest that starts with metalwork and ends somewhere far more personal. The contrast between Glover's gruff, practical demeanor at the forge and the vulnerability of his family history gives this particular smithing quest more emotional range than most players expect going in. Geralt's message, a quiet errand with real weight. The small, radiant quest asking you to deliver a sword from Geralt to her daughter Lash carries far more emotional context than its short length suggests, given everything Geralt reveals about grief, motherhood, and the forge wife tradition along the way. It's the kind of quest a player could complete in under 2 minutes without ever realizing just how much story was quietly packed into the handoff. A mother's whole heart folded into a single errand. Lash's own life in Karthwasten, scraping by amid mercenary troubles, gives the delivered sword an extra layer of poignancy once you understand just how far she's drifted from the stronghold that raised her. The Forge Master's fingers and a stronghold's trust. One of the Radiant quests tied to Orc stronghold access involves recovering an item called the Forge Master's fingers. returning it to a guard or chief to finally earn entry past the gate. The name itself hints at smithing's central importance to orc culture, suggesting that even the symbolic key to earning a stronghold's trust is shaped quite literally, like a tool of the forge, as though trust itself is something an orc community measures, in the same terms it measures good craftsmanship. Because the quest is radiant, its exact location shifts between playthroughs, meaning two players comparing notes on this particular favor may have completed it in entirely different corners of the map. The Last Scabbard of a Crash, An Old Book's Long Journey, Gorza Grabagol's quest to recover a particular book from inside Fort Sungard plays a small but pivotal role in opening the orc strongholds to outsiders. It's easy to treat as a forgettable fetch quest, yet completing it sends word rippling outward to every stronghold in Skyrim, proving that sometimes the smallest favors carry the widest consequences. A single dusty book changing how an entire culture sees you. Fort Sungard itself, crawling with bandits who clearly have no idea what they're sitting on, makes the recovery feel like rescuing a piece of orc heritage from people who'd never recognize its value. A web of quests, held together by steel. Looking at all of these quests together, a clear pattern emerges. Skyrim's writers consistently use blacksmiths, not warriors or wizards, as the gatekeepers to some of the game's richest hidden content, suggesting the developers understood something many players take a long time to notice. The person standing at the anvil often knows more about a place's secrets than anyone else in town, and is usually far more willing to share them, provided you ask the right question and offer the right favor in return. It's a design philosophy that quietly rewards curiosity over combat, patience over force, in a game most players first picked up expecting the opposite. The Skyforge's lonely distinction. Among Skyrim's handful of special forges, the Skyforge stands apart for one particular reason. Every other forge in the game, common and unique alike, carries a visible heat blur effect rippling above its flames, while the Skyforge originally lacked this detail entirely, until a later patch corrected the oversight. It's the kind of small visual inconsistency that only the most observant players ever noticed in the first place. A flame that for years simply burned a little too calmly compared to every other forge in Skyrim. It's a strangely fitting glitch, in hindsight, for the one forge in the entire game whose reputation never needed any extra visual flourish to feel legendary. The Ethereum Forge's single use. Introduced through the Dawnguard expansion, the Ethereum Forge can only ever be used once per playthrough, after locating it through the Lost to the Ages quest, and offers a choice between 3 unique items at that single moment. Unlike every other forge in the game, there's no return visit possible, which makes the decision of what to craft there unusually permanent. A single, irreversible choice carved out of an ancient Dwemer ruin that no amount of reloading inside the same save will ever let you revisit. Players who've spent the whole questline chasing rumors of Ethereum often find this final single-use decision more nerve-wracking than the dungeon crawl that led them there. The Lunar Forge's misunderstood reputation. As covered earlier, the Lunar Forge at Silent Moon's camp carries a mystical-sounding name that ultimately leads nowhere magical at all, functioning exactly like an ordinary forge despite the in-world rumors and notes suggesting otherwise. Its reputation seems built almost entirely on its evocative name rather than anything it actually does. A forge whose legend has outpaced its actual function for as long as players have been writing about it online. It's a small, quiet lesson in how easily a good name alone can build a reputation that the actual substance behind it never quite earns. The Midden's forgotten history. Long before the Atronach Forge became a player-accessible feature, the Midden beneath the College of Winterhold existed as a far older, half-forgotten space, hinted at through environmental storytelling and scattered notes from past mages who clearly understood far less about its true purpose than the player eventually comes to learn. It's less a smithing location than a slowly unraveling secret, with a forge sitting quietly at its center, waiting for someone curious enough to actually dig through every note left behind. The deeper passages beneath the Midden hint at something far older than the college built above it, a history the forge itself only scratches the surface of. Black Forge, a workshop beyond mortal reach. As mentioned in the lore section, Black Forge in Cold Harbor represents one of the very few smithing locations in the broader Elder Scrolls universe that exists entirely outside Skyrim's own borders, tied instead to Molag Bal's hostile, twisted realm. It's a useful reminder that the concept of the Forge, as both an idea and a location, stretches far beyond the province most players spend their time in, echoing into realms where mortal rules barely apply at all. Its existence quietly suggests that even the cruelest Daedric prince in Tamriel's pantheon still requires someone, somewhere, willing to keep the fires burning for him. Sacred ground. Disguised as a workshop. Across nearly every culture represented in Skyrim, certain forges carry a weight beyond their practical use. The Skyforge sits beside Jorvaska like a shrine. The Orc strongholds treat their forges as an extension of devotion to Malakath. Even the Atronach Forge, buried in a college basement, carries an air of ritual rather than routine. Skyrim rarely lets a forge simply be a forge, dressing nearly every one of them in some quiet way as a small piece of sacred ground. It's a pattern so consistent across cultures that it almost feels less like coincidence and more like the game quietly arguing that fire and metal will always carry something close to reverence wherever they're found. A province mapped in anvils. If you traced every named forge across Skyrim onto a single map, from the Skyforge above Whiterun to the Lunar Forge near Silent Moon's camp, to the Ethereum Forge buried in ancient ruins, you'd end up with something close to a secondary map of the province's history. One written not in roads or rivers, but in the places where people and orcs and Daedra chose to make something with fire and metal, a quieter, hammer-shaped history running just beneath the one most travelers ever notice. It's the kind of map no in-game book ever actually draws for you, existing only for the player patient enough to piece it together themselves, one forge at a time. The Skyforge Dagger's quiet companion connection. Among the items Yorland offers after the companion's questline, the Skyforge Steel Dagger holds a small distinction. It can sometimes be found already in the inventory of Ayla the Huntress, suggesting that even the companions themselves carry pieces of Yorland's craft into their daily lives, not just into ceremonial moments, a small detail that quietly humanizes a band of legendary warriors as people who simply trust their smith's work day to day. It's a quiet, easily missed thread tying the companions' everyday gear directly back to the very forge their entire order was built around. Wuthrad's long road to wholeness. Wuthrad, the great axe of Isgramor himself, spends much of the companion's questline shattered into pieces scattered across ancient barrows, each one recovered through dangerous excavation, before Yorland finally restores it using Kodlak's funeral fire. Few weapons in Skyrim carry as literal a journey from broken to whole as this one, its restoration mirroring, almost too neatly, the circle's own slow journey back towards something resembling peace. Each barrow holding a fragment is guarded by powerful Draga, ensuring that every single piece of the axe's eventual restoration is paid for in real, hard-fought danger. Ancient Nord Armor's unexpected Daedric listing. A small but genuinely confusing detail for many players involves Ancient Nord armor appearing under the Daedric category, specifically when crafted at the Skyforge, despite not actually being considered Daedric armor by any other measure in the game. Its tempering still benefits from the Daedric smithing perk, an inconsistency later addressed by unofficial patches but left fully intact in the base game, a quirk that has quietly puzzled smithing-focused players since the game's earliest release. It's the kind of oddity that surfaces in forum threads every few years, rediscovered by a new wave of players who assume, at first, that they've simply found a bug nobody else has ever noticed. The 5 choices of Skyforge weaponry. After completing the companion's main questline, Yorlan offers a free Skyforge steel weapon of your choosing, selectable from 5 distinct weapon types. It's a small, easily overlooked moment of player agency tucked into the middle of an emotionally heavy questline, letting you walk away from Kodlak's story carrying whatever weapon feels most like your own. A final, practical gift, wrapped inside an otherwise solemn ending. Many players don't even realize the choice is permanent and meaningful until well after they've made it, having clicked through the dialogue quickly while still emotionally processing everything that came before. Chrysamir's lineage of 2 traditions. As mentioned in the Legendary Smith section, Chrysamir's creation by Asteri Bedel ties the weapon's identity directly to a blending of Mannish and Merish smithing knowledge. While Chrysamir itself sits outside Skyrim's borders in most tellings, its lore quietly reinforces a theme that runs through the entire province, that the best smithing rarely stays confined to just one culture's methods. No matter how proudly any one tradition claims to stand alone, it's a fitting echo of Skyrim's own roster of smiths, Nord, Orc, Dunmer, and Imperial alike, each contributing something the others simply couldn't replicate on their own. Oaken and the Cost of Greatness. Returning briefly to Haemon Forgefire's story, the weapon Oaken stands as both his masterpiece and indirectly the reason he was eventually murdered by a jealous rival. It's a rare case in Skyrim's broader lore, where a weapon's reputation for excellence becomes inseparable from the violent fate of the person who made it. A blade whose beauty, in the end, may have cost its maker everything. It's a small, somber footnote tucked into an otherwise practical lore entry about the history of smithing, easy to read past without ever pausing on just how dark the implication really is. Daedric boots and a glitch with real consequences. As covered in the Atronach Forge section, the specific Daedric boots produced through that forge's recipes are mechanically distinct from ordinary Daedric boots, invisible in your inventory despite still weighing you down. It's a strange enough quirk that some players spend hours convinced their character has somehow become heavier for no reason at all, before finally tracking the cause back to a single overlooked crafting session months earlier. It's the kind of bug that becomes almost a rite of passage among long-time players, a confusing mystery nearly everyone eventually solves the same frustrated way. The steel that remembers its maker. Across Skyrim, certain weapons quietly carry the fingerprints of the smith, who made them long after they've changed hands, whether through a signature style of craftsmanship, a particular maker's quirk in the model, or simply the reputation that follows a piece once word spreads of where it came from. A blade forged at the Skyforge never quite stops being an Yorland Greymane blade, no matter how many owners it passes through. And that quiet permanence is part of what makes Skyrim steel feel less like loot and more like history. It's a subtle storytelling trick the game rarely calls attention to directly, letting reputation do the talking long after the original smith has left the room. The smith as a town's quiet backbone. Across nearly every settlement in Skyrim, from the grandest hold capital to the smallest mining village, a blacksmith's presence tends to signal something important about that community's survival. Towns without a forge of their own, like Winterhold in its diminished state, often read as places in decline, while towns with a thriving smith, however modest, tend to feel sturdier, more rooted, even when nothing else about them has changed. The simple sound of a hammer on an anvil somehow standing in for an entire town's well-being. It's a quiet visual and audio shorthand the game leans on more than most players ever consciously register. The voice behind Yorland. Yorland Greymane is voiced by Paul Gannis, an actor who also lends his voice to Ysgramor himself, among other characters scattered throughout the game. There's something quietly fitting about the fact that the voice of Skyrim's most legendary blacksmith and the voice of the legendary Nord who founded the very hall beside his forge belong to the very same performer, as though the game itself is gently winking at the connection between the two. It's the kind of behind-the-scenes detail that only surfaces once players start digging through voice credits out of pure curiosity, long after they've finished the main story. A loyalty that survives even transformation. If the Dragonborn happens to transform into a werewolf while standing near Yorland, he reacts unlike almost anyone else in the game, choosing to defend rather than attack. It's a small scripted detail, but it speaks volumes about Yorland's deep, unshakable ties to the Circle and the secrets of the Underforge sitting just beneath his own workstation. A loyalty that apparently doesn't flinch even when a friend changes shape entirely. Most NPCs would flee or attack outright, which makes Yorland's calm, steady reaction one of the clearest signals in the entire game of just how much he already knows. A marriage that outlasts death itself. In a quietly strange piece of scripting, if Fralia Greymane happens to die before Yorland, he offers no comment on her passing whatsoever, simply continuing his work at the forge as though nothing had changed. It's an unintentional reminder that even Skyrim's most emotionally written characters are still, underneath it all, governed by lines of dialogue that don't always anticipate every outcome, leaving a husband's grief unwritten simply because nobody thought to script it. It stands in quiet, unintended contrast to how thoroughly the game does account for his own death, almost as if the writers assumed players would always lose Yorland before they ever lost Fralia. The mystery of the falling smith. On certain versions of the game, players have reported Yorland randomly falling from the Skyforge platform, his body later discovered near Jorvaska, with no clear cause ever identified. Whether this stems from a pathing glitch, an unlucky dragon attack, or some deeper unresolved bug, the community has never settled on a definitive answer, leaving Yorland's occasional mysterious death, one of Skyrim's small unsolved curiosities, debated quietly in forums for well over a decade without ever reaching a tidy conclusion. It's oddly fitting, in a strange way, that the province's greatest smith should leave behind one final mystery that not even the most dedicated players have ever fully cracked. A trade that outlived every empire that tried to claim it. Looking back across everything we've wandered through tonight, from the legendary heat of the Skyforge to the smallest village anvil tucked into the pines of Falkreath, one quiet truth keeps surfacing, again and again. Empires have risen and crumbled across Tamriel's long history. Gods have been argued over. Wars have redrawn the borders of entire provinces. And through all of it, somebody, somewhere, has simply kept working the forge, indifferent to politics, loyal only to fire and patience and the next piece of honest steel. It's a thread quietly stitched through every era of this world's history, outlasting kings, outlasting prophecies, outlasting even the dragons themselves. Sleep well, knowing the forges never truly go cold. Across every hold, every stronghold, and every quiet village we've wandered through tonight, the forges of Skyrim keep burning long after the credits roll on any one player's save file. Yorland still climbs the steps to the Skyforge. Garrel still channels her grief into steel. Somewhere, a quartermaster at a war camp is still sharpening blades nobody will ever thank him for. It's a strange kind of comfort, knowing that this whole sprawling, hammered-together world keeps working itself quietly into shape, fire and metal and patience, whether or not anyone is there to watch it happen. The smith who hunts bears before he hunts crossbows. Gunmar, a Nord blacksmith recruited into the Dawn Guard, isn't found anywhere near a forge when you first track him down. He's out hunting a bear that's been killing people near his home and refuses to even discuss joining the cause until that bear is dealt with. Only after the beast is killed does he finally agree to head to Fort Dawnguard and take up his place at the smithy there. A small reminder that even the province's most useful future blacksmiths sometimes have more pressing business before they ever pick up a hammer for somebody else's war. The forge that builds weapons, no other smith can touch. Once Gunmar settles into Fort Dawnguard, his forge becomes the only place in the entire game where crossbows can actually be crafted from scratch, separate from the ordinary bolts any blacksmith can make. It's a strange exception to Skyrim's usual rule that any forge can build any weapon you have the perks and materials for, treating crossbows almost like a specialized trade secret the rest of Skyrim's blacksmiths simply never learned. A mountain of gold a smith never spends. Thanks to a long-standing quirk in his merchant behavior, Gunmar will happily accept anything you choose to sell him, without his gold supply ever actually decreasing, and without you ever receiving payment in return. Over a long enough playthrough, players who haven't paid close attention to this glitch can find him sitting on a small fortune that, by the game's own logic, should never have existed in the first place. A smith who has technically been getting everything for free his entire career. The sword that demands a killing to earn. The blade of sacrifice, a ceremonial ebony dagger handed over by a priestess of Boethia during her Daedric questline, comes with a grim expectation attached. The priestess intends for it to be used to kill a fellow traveller at the Circellum of Boethia as part of a ritual summoning, even though the game never actually requires that specific blade to complete the deed. It's a small loophole tucked into one of Skyrim's darkest quests, a weapon whose entire purpose is built around an act it doesn't strictly need to be present for. A katana, crafted to kill dragons. Specifically, Dragonbane, the unique katana recovered inside Skyhaven Temple during the main quest line, was forged with a very particular kind of enemy in mind. Its enchantment deals extra damage specifically to dragons, while delivering shock damage to every other kind of opponent instead, making it one of the few weapons in the game whose entire design philosophy centers on a single category of creature. Tempering it requires nothing more exotic than a quicksilver ingot and the arcane blacksmith perk, an oddly modest material requirement for a blade built to humble the sky's greatest predators. The armor that steals its quality from shadow. The Nightingale armor set, granted near the end of the Thieves Guild's questline, can only be tempered using void salts rather than any conventional ore or ingot, alongside the arcane blacksmith perk. It's a small but telling detail, suggesting that whatever otherworldly bargain produced this armor in the first place left it permanently tied to ingredients drawn from somewhere considerably stranger than an ordinary mine. A champion's armor built for a war that never quite finishes. In a piece of bonus creation club content built around the Civil War, the Stormcloaks and Imperials agree to settle their endless conflict with a single duel between two chosen champions, each kitted out in a full faction-specific set of unique armor and weaponry crafted specifically for the occasion. It's a rare moment where the game imagines its civil war being decided not by years of attrition and shifting hold control, but by two warriors and the gear built especially to outfit them for one decisive afternoon. The honor blade given, not forged. Becoming an honorary Thane of Falkreath can earn you a uniquely named sword gifted directly by the Jarl, a blade that, unlike most named weapons in the game, carries no special enchantment and varies in its base weapon type depending on circumstance. Its real value lies entirely in the name and the gesture behind it, a reminder that not every meaningful weapon in Skyrim earns its place through stats. Some earn it purely through the relationship that handed it to you. The steel hidden inside a throne, tucked into the back of an old warlord's seat in Ironbind Barrow, sits the steel battle axe of Fiery Souls, a weapon whose fire and soul trap enchantment makes it the only item in the entire game capable of teaching the rare Fiery Soul trap effect when disenchanted. It's an easy detail to walk past entirely, since nothing about an abandoned barrow's broken throne suggests it's hiding one of Skyrim's more mechanically unique, enchanting discoveries. A bow built for speed rather than power. Zephyr, a uniquely enchanted dwarven bow, doesn't try to compete with Skyrim's heaviest hitters on raw damage. Instead, its defining trait is an unusually fast draw speed, rivaling even the legendary Oriel's bow in how quickly it can be fired. Tempering it still follows ordinary dwarven crafting rules, using a dwarven metal ingot, which means even a weapon built around such a distinct identity still answers to the same humble forge mechanics as everything else. A daughter's hunting bow kept as a memorial. Angie's bow, kept by the reclusive archery trainer Angie at her secluded camp, was left to her by family members who have long since passed. It tempers like an ordinary steel weapon, with no exotic material required. Yet its real significance lies in what it represents, rather than what it does. A humble, well-worn bow that's quietly become one of the more personal heirlooms hidden away in Skyrim's wilderness. The crossbow that ignores armor. Outright. The enhanced crossbow, available only through Dawnguard-specific questing and craftable solely at Gunmar's forge, carries a special property baked directly into the weapon, rather than applied as an enchantment. Its bolts ignore fully half of a target's armor rating on impact, a mechanical advantage built directly into the base weapon. Curiously, the crossbow can still be separately enchanted on top of this, though the game will only ever display the armor-piercing properties text, rather than whatever enchantment you've added, quietly hiding one of its two advantages from view. Explosive bolts built from borrowed schematics. Among the Dawnguard's more specialized arsenal are exploding bolts, each one tipped with fire, frost, or shock damage, and each one requiring a separate schematic recovered through Serene Gerard's Radiant questline before they can ever be crafted. It's a quiet reminder that not every powerful piece of Dawnguard equipment comes from Gunmar's hammer alone. Some of it depends just as much on Serene's tinkering, and a fair bit of old Dwemer engineering recovered piece by piece. A forge quartermaster with a trove of refugees nearby. Fort Dawnguard doesn't just house its blacksmith and his forge. It also shelters several refugees who fled there seeking safety from the vampire threat plaguing the region. Though they're kept outside the fort's inner walls rather than given full residence within it. Gunmar's daily work then happens against the backdrop of a small displaced community camped just beyond the smithy's heat. People who came seeking protection but never quite made it all the way inside. The last quiet truth about Skyrim's steel. If there's one thing all of this circling back to crossbows, ceremonial daggers, dragon-slaying katanas, and borrowed schematics finally makes clear, it's that Skyrim's smithing world was never meant to be a single, uniform system. It's a patchwork of borrowed traditions, desperate wartime improvisation, Daedric bargains, and quiet personal heirlooms, all hammered together under one shared name. The fire at the forge looks the same everywhere you find it, but what gets made there and why never quite tells the same story twice. Sleep well, knowing the forges never truly go cold. Across every hold, every stronghold, and every quiet village we've wandered through tonight, the forges of Skyrim keep burning long after the credits roll on any one player's save file. Yorland still climbs the steps to the Skyforge. Garrel still channels her grief into steel. Somewhere, a quartermaster at a war camp is still sharpening blades nobody will ever thank him for. It's a strange kind of comfort, knowing that this whole sprawling, hammered-together world keeps working itself quietly into shape, fire and metal and patience, whether or not anyone is there to watch it happen.